1 second. No one comments because I can't see the chat. Sorry, guys. Okay, now I can see the chat. So the first few comments, it's not on my screen, but the rest should be. Evening Miles and CMF. Good to see you, Joe. How you been? Yeah, I can see the next comment. There we go. Good to see you as well, JP. How you doing? I think that's... Yep, Joe and JP. Coiny State X. Good to see you as well. Come on, how you doing, brother? How you been? Good evening, Miles. Good evening, Miles and CMF. Manny, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Pablo, how you doing? How you been? Come on, good to see you, brother. How you doing? How you been? Coiny State X. What's up, Miles? What's up, CMF? Kerry, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Miles. Curtis, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Let's go, Miles. T, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Bullix OP, good evening, Miles and CMF. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Carlos, hi, Miles. How you doing today, boss? I'm doing great. How you been? How's things? By accident. No problem, Pablo. What's up, Miles? And what's up, CMF? Good to see you as well. How you doing, Kerry? How you been? How's everyone doing today? Evening all. Susie, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? What's up, Miles and family? Hope all is well. Definitely happy Friday. Let's go, Ray. Good to see you. How you doing? Happy Friday. Evening, Miles. The missus wants to watch Love Island USA, but I told her we need to prioritize as Miles is on. Let's go, Mac. Sorry, Soz. I've not been in Spain in the mountains with the wild goats and no internet. Joe, no problem. Good to see you. How you been? Good evening, Miles and CMF. Free and Feather. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Miles. Good to see you as well, Mike. How you doing? How you been? Morning, Miles and CMF. Shelly, good to see you as well. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Miles. How you doing? I'm doing great. Kelly, how you been? Hi, Miles and CMF. Hope everyone is fantastic. Looking forward to a good times ahead. Let's go, Addy. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Fantastic. How are you? Doing great, JP. Let's go. So, I think everyone's tuning in very quickly today, which is brilliant to see. Welcome to the CMF Live. If you're watching this for the first time ever, the CMF stands for Crypto Mass Family. My name is Miles, and you can tune to this live Monday to Friday, 10 p.m. London time onwards. We essentially share the most recent news regarding cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, AI, politics, and regulations. Everything you need to know about essentially the world going into this digital space, especially now. Live shows that I do are extremely vital if you're a beginner inside the crypto space or an intermediate or even a pro, because a lot of things are happening in this world which everybody should be updated on. We're moving at a much more faster rate than we ever were before. Now that we got regulations and Trump has signed essentially the first bill in after the votes were successful. So welcome to CMF Live. If you're watching for the first time ever, this is episode 337 of the CMF Live. Also, the disclaimer of this live, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. And also, we do Q&As in this live as well, which means if you do have any questions or any statements to make, put it down inside the comment section. More than happy to answer the questions you may have. Now, before we go through the first news, which is obviously regarding the signing of the first bill and the next movements, what's coming out of the United States in terms of cryptocurrencies and so on, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we go straight into the first news. Let's see where we're at first. We were at here. Happy CMF Friday. Let's go, Mike. Good evening, Miles. Funky brother. Good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Good evening, Miles of CMF. Orphan, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Hey, Miles and everyone. Hope all is good. Great day for crypto. Let's go. Let's go. One love. Pierce, evening, Miles of CMF. Good to see you. Pierce, how you doing, brother? How you been? What have I missed? Funky brother. Perfect timing. You're not late. You're actually perfectly on time, is what I would say. I will listen tomorrow. At work, got to get some sleep. God bless everyone. Let's go. One love. See you tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Monday, essentially. Same time as usual. Am I late? No, Funky Brother, you're actually perfectly on time. We haven't even went through the first news yet. We're just about to go through it. So, a lot of things essentially to cover on tonight's live. We have US news, Trump news, signing news, bank news, Ripple news. Quite a mixture of news to go through on tonight's live. And the first one we're going to start off with is the US's next movements. Now that essentially the bill is being signed, where we're heading towards, and so on. So here it is. The US crypto dominance, Trump's bold vision for a global leadership. The cryptocurrency industry is about to witness history with US President Donald Trump poised to sign the Genius Act into law, which he already has. And two of the top industry players will be at the White House to witness the regulatory milestones. Brian Armstrong, the co-founder and chief executive officer of Coinbase, and Jeremy, the co-founder and CEO of Circle, are also headed to the White House. As the cryptocurrency industry awaits the historical event, which already happened, the signing is done, this comes after Congress passed the Genius Act and two other digital asset regulation bills, the Clarity Act and the Anti-CBDC Act. Crypto hailed the legislations as milestones, as a major win for the industry, particularly the Genius Act, essentially, which targets the stablecoin sector, heads to Trump's desk for the signing into law. As I said, it's already been signed. Armstrong, whose Coinbase is the biggest US-based crypto exchange, posted on X that the Genius Act marks the next step, essentially, in the crypto innovation and adoption stage. In a comment, Dainter, Circle's chief strategy officer, also said the House vote to clear the Genius Act for president's signatures, defining a moment for the future of money and the internet financial system. It signals a strong baptism of support for responsible innovation and sends essentially a clear message that the US will lead in the regulations of a dollar-backed payment stablecoin, which essentially means it's the ending of Tether. As I said previously, the only stablecoin that's going to struggle extremely to get approved inside the United States is going to be Tether, because they're not even based inside the United States, which makes even 10 times worse for Tether. The cryptocurrency world is buzzing with significant developments that could reshape the global digital asset landscape. According to the report by essentially Walter Bloomberg Economic News, the former US President Donald Trump has made a striking declaration. A forthcoming stablecoin regulation act, dubbed the Genius Act, is set to secure the global dominance for the United States in a burgeoning cryptocurrency sector, with Trump expected to sign these off, which, again, as I said, he already has. Donald Trump's recent comments underscores a strict shift in the US's approach to digital assets. For years, the debate around cryptocurrency regulations inside the United States has been marked by a patchwork of state and federal initiatives, often leading to uncertainty and hindering innovation. Trump's exhortation about achieving global dominance through the Genius Act signals a proactive rather than a reactive stance. This isn't just about essentially managing risks. It's about leveraging the potential of digital currencies to bolster America's economy and technological leadership as essentially on the world stage. The concept of a US crypto dominance isn't merely aspirational. It's also rooted in the recognition that digital assets, particularly stablecoins, are becoming essentially increasingly integral to the global financial stage. I also want to point out that today was an extremely sad day for banks, because now that crypto has essentially got the green light, banks aren't going to be too happy about that in any sort of way at all, because now they've lost the race. You know, banks could always print money essentially on fractional reserves and so on, but now so can fintech companies regarding stablecoins also, which is also something that I revealed a few nights ago regarding essentially JP Morgan might have been the one essentially behind Ripple's SEC case. But we'll get to JP Morgan a little bit later on today. But the concept of a US crypto dominance isn't merely aspiration, it's rooted in recognition. Comprehensive regulatory frameworks could also provide the necessary clarity for businesses to provide the necessary, essentially, for innovation and investors to participate securely for the US dollars to maintain essentially its primary in a digitalized world. This vision aims to prevent other nations from outpacing the US in this critical technological frontier. The need for a robust stablecoin regulation has been a persistent topic of discussions among policymakers, regulators, and industry stakeholders. Key areas typically addressed in such legislations include issuance of requirements, essentially ensuring that stablecoin issuers maintain sufficient reserves, are transparent, and that their holdings are undergoing regular audits, which is something that Tether always fails to do. Hence why they're not allowed in the EU. This builds trust and mitigates risk of collapse as seen with some of the past algorithmic stablecoin failures, referring to USDT. Consumer protection, establishing safeguards for users, including clear disclosure requirements despite essentially resolution mechanisms and protection against fraud. Anti-money laundering, AML, and counter essentially illicit activities, implementing strict measures to prevent illicit activities, aligning stablecoins with existing financial regulations, interoperability and innovation, balancing regulatory oversights with the need to foster innovation and allow stablecoins to seamlessly integrate into various financial systems. The absence of a clear federal guidelines has led to regulatory uncertainties, often forcing crypto businesses to navigate a complex and fragmented essentially legal landscape. This uncertainty can stifle innovation, push companies offshore, and leave consumers vulnerable, but not anymore. Investor confidence, a well-defined regulatory framework provides clarity, security for investors, encouraging broader participation in the digital asset market space. In other words, institutions now will feel comfortable using essentially stable coins. American citizens should feel comfortable also essentially, from the retail section, getting involved in stable coins now, using digital dollars rather than just using fiat. Financial stability by regulating stable coins, potential systematic risk. The broader essentially financial systems can be mitigated, especially as their essentially market capitalization grows. Innovation hub, clear rules can attract leading blockchain companies and talent to the US now, fostering an environment where innovation can thrive responsibly. A lot of American essentially blockchain companies left a long time ago the US because of Gary Gensler, and they went to the Middle East, like for example the UAE, like Dubai. A lot of American blockchain companies are operating out of Dubai, but I do feel like they're all going to be coming back to the United States now, with Trump leading the way. Global competitiveness, other nations are actively developing their own frameworks also now, because looking at America's footsteps, for example, as I said previously, Hong Kong is looking at America right now on what's their next step. So is the EU, so is the UK, so is Russia, as we discussed yesterday's live, so is essentially China also. Now, the global competitiveness, other nations are actively essentially developing their own crypto frameworks. Robust US legislations ensures that countries remain competitive and influential in shaping global standards. As I said previously, this is bigger than what anybody thinks. America has just opened the floodgates of liquidity to the blockchain space right now, with America being the biggest market space in the entire world and having the loudest voice out of any market space in the world, with establishing rules and regulations, with Trump signing them into law. Other countries are now going to jump on the bandwagon, and the countries that are already on the bandwagon of cryptocurrencies are going to excel essentially at a much more quicker rate. And we're going to get liquidity essentially coming in from not just American institutions or the American retail section or the American banks, but we're also going to start getting liquidity coming in from other nations around the world that are following America's footsteps. This is what I mean by, people need to realize the bigger picture regarding the rules and regulations, as I described on yesterday's live and the live before, that America has just opened up the floodgates of liquidity towards the crypto space with this move. The Genius Act could essentially be the cornerstone of a comprehensive US strategy, moving beyond essentially reactive enforcement actions to a proactive essentially framework that embraces essentially the future of finance. Now, at the same time that all of this is going on, Trump has also introduced new tariffs. Now, XRP hasn't reacted negative in any sort of way to tariff news so far. Some crypto projects have. Some cryptocurrencies out there have reacted in a negative way, regarding the tariff news that's come out today, also alongside the signings that's going on for the bills. But here it is. Trump's new tariffs affect global markets, including crypto, but I would have to say some cryptos. Donald Trump, president essentially of the United States, today announced significant tariffs on international trade via Truth Social and official channels, highlighting a shift in the US trade policies. The tariffs could influence various markets, including essentially cryptocurrencies, and encourage volatility and risk hedging behavior due to essentially increased global economic uncertainties. President Trump announced tariffs ranging from 35% to 40% to combat essentially trade deficits as a part of America First strategy. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Benson stated that these measures aim to bring countries to the negotiation table, aiming essentially for a much more fairer trade agreements to be happening. He mentioned more countries will come to the table this week inside the United States and finalize their respective deals with good faith. So we should be expecting a lot more countries essentially coming to the United States and doing a trade agreement essentially on the table, which is also brilliant to see, which means the world could start moving on from the whole trade tension situation. Governments and industries globally must adjust as Trump's directive impacts international trade relations. His primary announcement included emphasizing U.S. market strength and urging global participation as major markets express concerns over potential economic consequences. These tariffs could lead to significant capital reallocations within the financial sector, with cryptocurrencies essentially possibly being a favored safe haven. Historical trends indicate that increased crypto volatility during similar economic conditions, potentially influencing essentially market behaviors. Tariff revenues surged, boosting customs revenue to $87.2 billion in the first half of 2025. The automotive sector was notably affected, with tariffs exceeding $10.7 billion. As a result, the financial markets, including cryptocurrencies, are preparing for further volatility. Major US stock indices hovered near record levels as essentially markets assessed the latest attacks on the Fed chair. US stocks hovered near record levels, also aimed ongoing uncertainty over the Fed and tariffs. Today, the Dow Jones fell 238 points, or essentially 0.54%, and the S&P 500 fell 0.14%. At the same time, the tech-focused Nasdaq component also fell 0.09%. The much-anticipated, essentially, earnings did not deliver the news that traders were hoping for. Now, the stocks fell essentially 5%, 1% to 5%, despite beating earning forecasts. Traders were also focused on the latest tariffs against the EU and the ongoing feud between the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell and essentially President Donald Trump. For one, Trump escalated his demands against the EU, pushing for a 15% minimum tariff on imports to 20%. This escalation comes after weeks of negotiations that seem to establish a 10% baseline tariff on most goods. What is more, essentially, is Trump rebuked the EU's offer to reduce its tariffs on US essentially automobiles and suggested that the rate could stay at 25%. Also, Trump has continued his attacks against the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, calling him a numbskull for not lowering interest rates. The president stated that higher interest rates are making it more difficult for young people to be able to afford homes. Trump also said that Jerome Powell was essentially truly one of my worst appointees, before placing a part of the blame on Joe Biden, who reappointed him again. The attacks come after ongoing criticism over the essentially $2.5 billion renovation of several Fed buildings. Apparently, Jerome Powell has been essentially misusing a lot of money. We're talking billions amount of money. Several Trump appointees criticized the chair over essentially renovations, setting the stage for a potential coup. However, recent reports suggest that Trump appointees pushed for the use of expensive marble in the buildings, which added to the costs. So, as we have the signings going on, which is incredible to see, the crypto space is about to do a massive liftoff, is what I could say. At the same time, we still have the tariff situations going on. But the good news is, out of all of that, some crypto projects couldn't care less that there's tariff situations going on. For example, XRP, by the looks of it, doesn't care less. It's still, essentially sitting at a high placement right now. It's getting ready for its next leg up. Some crypto projects have reacted in a negative way regarding tariff news that's come out, and some crypto projects, it just looks like they're decoupling and going towards essentially utility now that we got regulations coming in, which is brilliant to see. Now, what we're going to be talking about next is US banks, or banks in general. But before we talk about that, let's go inside the comment section first. As I said previously, this is live, which means if you do have any questions or even statements to make, put it down inside the comment section. More than happy to answer any questions you may have. So don't be shy. If you do have questions, go for it. And after the comment section, we're going to be talking about US banks, or in general, all types of banks around the world, because there's a lot more to it regarding the Genius Act and all the other acts that are coming through. Now, let's see where we were at before we were at here. JP said Tether was there today. I was surprised Brad wasn't. Everybody else was. Yeah. Hi, Miles. Michael, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? How you today? I'm doing great. I'm guessing Brad was extremely busy with the SEC trying to drop its lawsuit. Miles, Swift revenue were down 15% today due to Ripple's ledger, XRP ledger. I did hear about that, yes. Swift transaction volume plunges 15% as Ripple XRP ledger activity explodes and payment revolution. I did hear about that. That's correct, yes. Let's go XRP. Let's go, funky brother. Hi, Miles, the CMF. Peg, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Happy Pisces, good to see you. How you doing? How you been? Now, US banks. So this is why there's a lot more to the Genius Act that's being passed, all the regulations that are being passed for the crypto space now. So one of them is, well, we know for a fact that banks are losing their position. For the longest time, the banks had the loudest voice. They were the money printing machines of the world. But now that we have a Genius Act passed and signed also, banks are no longer the leading ones. Well, they are still now, but as time goes by, fintech companies like Ripple will take the rankings. So here is a little bit of news straight after the signing. So straight after essentially Trump signed the Genius Act into the bill, this is the article that came out straight after. US banks fear losing up to $6.6 trillion in deposits to stablecoins. Just to repeat that one more time, US banks are right now fearing of losing up to $6.6 trillion in deposits to stablecoins. In other words, the banks have lost and Ripple has won. Some US banks are essentially panicking over a growing threat, stablecoins. They're not worried about the volatility or speculation anymore because now it's law. They're essentially worried about losing trillions in customer deposits. This week, the anxiety got louder after lawmakers in Washington passed the Genius Act, a bill that lays out the legal rules for stablecoins in the US. The House of Representatives essentially approved the bill, and the vote was major, 308 to essentially 122. Now, the reason the banks are tense isn't complicated at all. They're staring down the possibility of a serious cash drain. A Treasury Department report released in April warned that stablecoins could cause up to $6.6 trillion in deposits and outflows, depending on whether issuers are allowed to offer returns that match or beat bank accounts. Banks know that payments are essentially their turf, and cross-border transfers in particular are vulnerable right now. These transfers currently take days and involve high fees. Stablecoins don't have these types of problems that banks essentially have right now. Even though essentially the Genius Act essentially bans stablecoin issuers from paying interest, banks aren't convinced enough right now. They're watching crypto companies experiment with their ways and their reports. Even though the Genius Act bans stablecoin issuers from essentially paying interest, banks aren't convinced that's enough. They're watching crypto companies experiment with ways to essentially to reward holders anyway. Coinbase, for example, gives customers a 4.10% reward for holding USDC coin. The coin is issued by Circle, which also splits the yields and it earns from a government-backed securities with Coinbase. Look, banks are, you could say, angry and disappointed at the same time, because what's the point of holding fiat? Let's say, for example, you hold US dollars in a bank account with JP Morgan Chase, for example. You're not really going to be earning much in terms of a yield. However, if you take the same amount you may have, $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, and put it as, for example, in USDC or USD, you could get yields on your return. And in this case, 4.10% rewards. Who doesn't want that? And that's what banks are afraid of, that banks are becoming a thing of the past and fintechs are technically the new banks with this law that's just passed. This law has done so much. Critics say this looks almost identical to paying interest. Coinbase insists it's not the same thing and claims the rewards program is separate from its deal with Circle. Still, that hasn't stopped banks from raising alarms. Banks are trying to say that Coinbase and any other essentially stablecoin, Binance, Coinbase, or even Ripple, so on, when they do offer essentially on their stablecoins yield returns and so on, banks are saying that they can't do that because then everybody's going to run towards RLUSD, USDC, and so on. Nobody wants to hold fiat anymore. The Genius Act passage is just the first step. You could see how greedy the banks are because all they care about is their own profits, not about their clients. Federal regulations still need to decide how much capital essentially stablecoin issuers must hold. That's another area where banks feel exposed. If stablecoin issuers don't face the same capital liquidity requirements, they could operate with less oversight while pulling them essentially more money in. The question of the Federal Reserve access is also heating up. Right now, only banks get to use the Fed's backstop tools during market stress. But the Genius Act doesn't block non-banks from essentially accessing the banks also, essentially accessing the Fed also, which means the decision falls to the Fed itself. That's a problem for banks because they argue that anyone getting access to the Fed's benefits should also face the same rules they do. If consumers stop pulling cash out of the FDIC-backed accounts and putting it into stablecoins, the money might still end up in banks, but in a single account that's too large to be issued under the $250,000 limit. That creates a layer of risk that didn't exist essentially before. And if fewer essentially people keep their money in traditional bank accounts, banks will have a harder time making loans, especially to smaller businesses and households. That's why banks argue that the Fed needs to step in and level the playing field before stablecoins get too far ahead. Do you know what this tells me? That the theory that everybody had inside the crypto space, that the Fed, essentially the SEC, was holding Ripple back because it's all about the timing. But then there was the other theory that I had, which was essentially it was the banks that were trying to hold Ripple back on purpose, like banks like JP Morgan, for example, which we're going to talk about a little bit essentially after this news. But this tells me essentially that banks were essentially behind weaponizing the SEC to go after Ripple because they knew Ripple was a threat from day one. They knew Ripple was a threat from day one. JP Morgan knew Ripple was a threat. All these major banks knew it was a threat. So they weaponized the SEC to go after companies like Ripple so they can slow down their progress inside the United States while the banks essentially catch up. Because the banks know that they were going to lose this race. And then JP Morgan decided to go with Ethereum and build their private Onyx chain, which I don't think did too well because from JP Morgan's recent statements, they don't see stablecoins as the future. They're seeing CBDCs as the future, and they're scared about that because they know companies like Ripple will be the one leading CBDCs inside the United States, being an American company with the only CBDC platform out there that has multiple CBDC awards. Honestly, all this tells me is that it was the banks. It was banks like JP Morgan that weaponized the SEC to go after Ripple because they knew Ripple was a threat. And that Ripple, not going public adds more to it because they can't control it. Even with the risk, not all banks are fighting this trend. For example, Bank of America became Ripple's partner a very long time ago. Let's just put that out there. Some of the largest banks in the US are exploring the idea of launching their own stablecoins through a joint effort. They want to control the relays rather than essentially get left behind. The thing is that if Walmart, Amazon, and essentially other multinationals are going to experiment with launching stablecoins, and they are, then banks need their own tokens to stay in the race. Payment companies are watching too, but they don't seem nearly as stressed. Just today, for example, MasterCard describes stablecoins as enabling faster, lower-cost cross-border payments, a clear sign that they're more interested in integration than competition. We're going to talk about MasterCard a little bit later on tonight's live as well. But honestly, all this tells me is that the banks that didn't want Ripple to get ahead weaponized the SEC to go after companies like Ripple because they knew Ripple was a threat. But here's the thing. Who won at the end? Ripple. Because how did Ripple win at the end? Because the Genius Act passed, because the Clarity Act passed, and the Anti-CBDC essentially Act passed as well, which some people think the Anti-CBDC means that the US can't have CBDCs. No, what it technically states is that the Fed can't be the one essentially that prints the CBDCs. But a private entity, it leaves room error for that. So at the end, Ripple won that. Essentially, they might have won the battle, as I said previously in yesterday's live, but Ripple won the battle. They might have won the battle, but Ripple won the war. To add on top of that, JP Morgan, for example, JP Morgan today, out of all days, comes out after Trump signs the bill for the Genius Act. JP Morgan comes out and says it favors tokenized bank deposits over stablecoins. So JP Morgan comes out today and goes, we're not very fond of stablecoins anymore. We are fond of tokenized banknotes. JP Morgan's strategy reflects increasing regulatory favor for tokenized deposits, which could reshape market dynamics and influence stablecoin adoption trends. JP Morgan Chase, under CEO Jamie Dimon, is actively testing essentially a permission token deposit product named JPMD on the Ethereum-based platform. Obviously, because Base being with Coinbase being with BlackRock, being with essentially JP Morgan, it's just this crypto mafia situation that's going on, essentially what the Cardano founder was talking about. The move represents a shift in preference due to regulatory acceptance, particularly outside the US. As analysts know, tokenized deposits align more closely with existing fiat systems. That's the only reason JP Morgan is going towards tokenized bank essentially deposits, because it's the only thing that's similar or close to the fiat system we currently have. JP Morgan's actions could significantly impact crypto markets, influencing both traditional financial systems and blockchain technology. As Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, remarked, we're going to essentially be involved in both JP Morgan deposit coin and stablecoin to understand it, to be good at it. I think they're real, but I don't know why you would want a stablecoin as opposed to just payment. You don't know why people just want stablecoins as opposed to payments? What, a bank account? Because we don't need bank accounts if we have cryptocurrencies. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's more reliable, and the bank can't freeze my bank account. For example, if I'm sending money on the XRP ledger to my friend, no matter where he is around the world, my XRP wallet is not going to ask me 21 questions about my own money. If I want to make a big transfer out of my own bank account using, for example, Lloyd's bank account, Barclays bank account, HSBC bank account, Santander bank account, or even a JP Morgan Chase account, they're going to ask me 21 questions if I'm going to send a large amount of money, or if I'm going to take out a lot of money, essentially a large amount of money. Even though it's my money, the bank will ask me 21 questions. But you know who won't ask me questions? My XRP wallet, my XLM wallet, my Solana wallet, my Cardano wallet, my AVAX wallet, my Ton wallet. That's why essentially people prefer to use cryptocurrencies rather than these traditional systems. But JP Morgan coming out and going, we don't see the point of stable coins. Why would anyone want to use that? Why people just, don't want to use the traditional system? Because the traditional system is rigged. That's why nobody wants to use it. The endorsements of tokenized bank deposits might challenge the dominance of stablecoins such as USDC and USDT, leading to a shift in market preference and financial structures. Analysts highlight the role of regulatory clarity in this shift, as tokenized deposits are treated more like traditional financial instruments. Historical precedents like JPM Coin and Signet indicate a growing trend in institutional players adopting essentially permission infrastructure. This could result essentially in technological advancements, aligning legacy bank systems with blockchain technologies, and possibly leading to extensive essentially integrations of cryptocurrency within traditional finance. Banks have to turn into fintech companies or they're going to get left behind. The only banks that are guaranteed to survive are central banks. So like the Bank of England, the Bank of the EU, the Bank of Thailand, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of Australia, essentially the Bank of these types of banks will survive because they're central banks, which will essentially eventually be printing CBDCs, wholesale CBDCs and retail CBDCs. As essentially was stated by JP Morgan themselves, JP Morgan coming out and saying that they fear that the world is going to go towards CBDCs and stablecoins won't be the biggest player, they were correct. The only banks that are guaranteed to survive are central banks because they're the ones that are going to be printing the CBDCs with a private entity behind them, Ripple. But essentially other banks like JP Morgan, Barclays, HSBC, Santander, Lloyd's, or any of the essentially banks out there, they have no choice but to turn into fintech companies and start using the XRP ledger. Banks need to stop using Ethereum. Not all banks are using Ethereum. It's just JP Morgan that's very focused on Ethereum, and maybe one other bank out there. But honestly, what this tells me is that it was, in my opinion, it looks like it was JP Morgan and maybe other banks out there or other institutions that essentially weaponized the SEC to go after Ripple because they knew Ripple was going to be a threat one day. And they thought slowing down Ripple's progress and making it not happen, because Gary Gensler didn't just wake up randomly one day and decide to sue Ripple into the ground and look stupid on camera and in front of senators and in front of congressmen. The man looks stupid in front of them because he's going to give a straight answer. Pocahontas didn't wake up one day naturally and decide to sue, essentially to back Gary Gensler and go after Ripple. Pocahontas doesn't even know what Bitcoin is, never mind what XRP is. So they were definitely weaponized by some entity to go after Ripple. And my guess was it was an entity like JP Morgan. Because if you look at JP Morgan's history, everybody remember Titanic? And that JP Morgan wasn't the only one not on the Titanic. But every other banker and family member was. So the idea of JP Morgan doing this isn't that far-fetched, given their sketchy past. Now, El Salvador is what we're going to talk about next. But before we talk about El Salvador, let's go inside the comment section first. Honestly, Ripple has definitely won the war. And now they're going to fear what XRP is capable of. So let's go inside the comment section first before we go through the next news. The next news being El Salvador. But it's a very interesting one regarding El Salvador. And we're going to talk about MasterCard and tonight's live a little bit later on. But let's go to the comment section first. Let's see where we're at. So my portfolio, XRP, XLM, XDC, HBAR, Filecoin, Quant, ACH, AVAX, Near Protocol. What do you think I should sell for profit when Mouse? XLM hasn't moved to be able to sell. XLM, XDC, it hasn't moved that much for you to sell any sort of profits. XRP has moved if you want to take out profits. Again, it's completely up to you if you want to take out profits. It's never a bad idea to take out profits, not financial advice at all. Quant hasn't moved to the price point you want to take out profits on. Filecoin hasn't moved that much either. ACH, no. AVAX, no. Near Protocol, no. None of them are good to take out profits on. The only one that has moved tremendously is XRP. But again, that's completely up to you if you want to take out any sort of profits. You know where I stand, which is I'm not taking out profits whatsoever on XRP right now at all, because we just got regulations and we're just about to go into utility, and the case is just about to get dropped regarding Ripple, and the ETFs are just about to come through for XRP. We're at the beginning of the race right now, the actual race we're waiting for, the finance race. And JP Morgan is going to realize that they bet on the wrong horse, which was Ethereum. Banks CEOs fear Christmas bonuses are gone this year. By the looks of it, yep, $6.6 trillion is about to get wiped out from the banking industry and enter into the crypto space regarding stablecoins. 6.6 trillion is so far estimated to exit out of banks and go into stablecoins because of the Genius Act. So far, it's been estimated 6.6 trillion is about to exit banks. So 6.6 trillion of liquidity is about to enter the crypto space. Just that in itself. There's more on top of that, a lot more on top of that. As I say, a lot of people need to understand how big this law is. Banks have been ripping us off for centuries, facts, and they're not happy that they just lost. They did not realize that Ripple has been playing chess all along, checkmate, facts, fuck you, brother. Nobody believes their BS anymore. JP Morgan say one thing and go and do something else, facts also. Hi, Miles and family. Alex, good to see you. How you've been? I have to thank the suppression of XRP. It gave me the opportunity to buy and buy. I agree, facts, honestly, 100%. Interesting. Do you thoughts about Epstein's story heating up and the crypto bills passing? Yes, in my opinion, there's relevance regarding the Epstein situation and the bills that are passing right now. As I said previously, in my opinion, I feel like Trump is using the evidence that he has regarding the files from Epstein to essentially leverage it to get what he wants from certain politicians. And that's why he's not releasing it. And I do believe that the overnight Democrats that decided to vote for the crypto space, even though all of them were negative crypto, the entire Democratic Party, pretty much 99% of the Democratic Party was anti-crypto. They have one conversation with Trump, all of a sudden 108 of them start voting yes for the crypto, essentially Clarity Acts and so on and so on. So that doesn't add up unless you have leverage on certain people. And the people that are also coming out and saying, well, the Democratic Party, don't have anything to hide. First of all, the Democratic Party could have released the Epstein files under Joe Biden, but they didn't. Second of all, people are saying the Democratic Party voted in favor of showing the Epstein files. If you did the maths, the Democratic Party knew that if they voted in favor of showing the files, that they would lose on that vote on purpose and look like the angels in that scenario. The Democratic Party knew that if they voted yes on the Epstein files to show those files, that they will never be revealed because the votes wouldn't add up. But instead, the Democratic Party will look like the angels in that scenario. So, one, the Democratic Party could have shown those files under Joe Biden. They didn't for a reason because they're also involved. They're politicians. Of course, they're greedy and they're involved. And second, the Democratic Party knew voting in favor of showing the files, they would never win the votes because the numbers would never add up. But they'll look like the angels in that scenario. So regarding what's happening now, and where I stand as well is that the files should be shown. 100% they should be shown. But I think Trump is just using that in his favor of leveraging to make certain politicians do certain things. And for example, those 13 Republicans that voted in favor, essentially that voted no the first time around on the crypto bill, the Genius bill, tomorrow they were all yes after having one conversation with Trump. 108 essentially Democrats voted no after having one conversation with Trump. They all turned out to be yes the next day. So something doesn't add up. It's just the only thing that comes to it is leverage. He has something on them. But regarding the Democratic Party, they had the option to show the files and they didn't. And now they're trying to say, well, we would have shown it. No, you wouldn't have because you would have shown it. And two, the only reason the Democratic Party voted yes on showing the files is because they knew they would never win the votes because the maths wouldn't add up. But those people think they're too smart. That's the issue. They're politicians. They're actually idiots in real life. Like Bank of America, if you can't beat them, join them. Facts. What Bank of America did was the best thing. I thought there was going to be a major announcement about Tether today, or was that his rumors? Yeah, that was just rumors. There was no major announcement regarding Tether whatsoever. That's why the Titanic went down, pretty much. Yep, so that JP Morgan could take the rankings. The law passed, but there's no clarity yet because the theater was in the White House today. That's true. Facts. I love your passion, Miles, and I think you're 100% correct about the banks and the SEC. Let's go. Good points. Thanks. No problem, D. Anytime. Do you know Epstein was interested in Bitcoin? I don't know how far Epstein's interest was into Bitcoin, to be fairly honest. That matter, I don't know much about regarding his interest into essentially Bitcoin. But I know how politics works. I know how greed works. And I know how that type of mindset works. That's right. They can never get one over me. I know instantly when the Democratic Party voted yes on showing the files, everybody inside the cryptos, everybody inside of X, social media in general, on the news, they were coming out and saying Democrats voted yes because they wanted the truth to come out. They only voted yes because they knew the votes wouldn't add up, so the truth will never come out. Now, El Salvador is what we're going to talk about next. El Salvador hasn't brought Bitcoin. That might surprise you and me and a lot of people. So we know for a fact that El Salvador was always essentially a Bitcoin country. It was the first country to announce Bitcoin as legal tender. And then when the International Monetary Fund told El Salvador stop buying Bitcoin, they said yes, just to receive a loan. And then they were still buying. But apparently they weren't. So has El Salvador been lying to everyone regarding buying Bitcoin? Here's the confusion. El Salvador hasn't brought Bitcoin since signing with the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund published a report, essentially, about its ongoing loan agreement with El Salvador, claiming that the Central American Bank country has not brought any new Bitcoins since signing the agreement in December 2024. But El Salvador said they did. El Salvador's Chivo Bitcoin wallet does not adjust its Bitcoin reserves to reflect changes in its clients' Bitcoin's deposits. The report read, Chivo doesn't sell its Bitcoins, leading to a minor discrepancies that made it appear as if El Salvador's public sector was accumulating Bitcoin. A letter of intent signed by El Salvador's central bank president, Douglas Pablo, and Minister of Finance, Jorson, essentially contained within the International Monetary Fund report, confirmed the details. In line with the commitments under the program, the stock of Bitcoins held by the public sector remains unchanged. We are taking steps to mitigate the physical risks by reducing the public sector's role in the Chivo wallet and reaffirming the Bitcoin project. Cointelegraph reached out to El Salvador's Bitcoin Office and National Commission of Digital Assets, but hasn't received a response yet from them. The government of El Salvador signed a $1.4 billion loan deal with the International Monetary Fund in December 2024 and agreed to scale back its involvements in Bitcoin on the loan offer. In January 2025, El Salvador's legislators reserved the Bitcoin laws, now making acceptance of BTC as a legal tender voluntarily, while also agreeing to stop accumulating Bitcoin using taxpayers' money. Despite this, El Salvador's Bitcoin office continued to claim that the government was steadily accumulating Bitcoin, flying in the face of the International Monetary Fund deal. So, what's going on in El Salvador? Is El Salvador buying Bitcoin? Because according to the International Monetary Fund, when they looked essentially at their wallets, I'm guessing they were showing full transparency, El Salvador hasn't brought any Bitcoin since they signed the agreement. But then El Salvador is boasting about how they're buying Bitcoin. But when the International Monetary Fund looked at their reports this week, they haven't brought anything since the agreement. Has El Salvador been lying to everyone about buying Bitcoin? This reached essentially when the International Monetary Fund sent another notice to El Salvador asking it to stop accumulating BTC under the terms of service on the loan agreement. Now, Bucco essentially responded with defiance, telling the International Monetary Fund that the country would continue accumulating Bitcoin daily. No, it's not stopping. If it didn't stop when the world essentially orchestrated us and most Bitcoiners abandoned us, it won't stop now and it won't stop in the future, Bucco wrote on March 4th. The International Monetary Fund report sent shockwaves through the Bitcoin community due to El Salvador's position as one of the leading countries to embrace a national state Bitcoin reserve and Bucco's outspoken stance on stacking Bitcoin. Bucco has been coming out on X socials, has been coming out in public, essentially saying, nobody's going to stop us from buying Bitcoin. We've been buying Bitcoin at these prices and so on. By the looks of it, they haven't. They haven't brought any Bitcoins. They've just been lying to everyone that they're buying and accumulating Bitcoin. Because according to the International Monetary Fund report that came out, they haven't brought a single Bitcoin since the agreement with the IMF back in 2024. So International Monetary Fund essentially is there's two ways to go about this. It's either El Salvador's lying or the International Monetary Fund's lying. But why would the International Monetary Fund lie? There's no benefit for them to lie whatsoever. So that means El Salvador's been lying to the whole world about their Bitcoin purchases. They haven't brought any. That one was extremely surprising because, you know, of how Buchel stands and talks about Bitcoin. Nobody can stop us. We will continue buying. Not even the International Monetary Fund can stop us, is what Buchel said. But he hasn't bought a single Bitcoin. So it was just a bluff. Now, moving on from the International Monetary Fund and El Salvador to the SEC. But before we talk about the SEC, let's go inside the comment section first. As I said previously, this is live, which means if you do have any questions or statements to make, put it down inside the comment section. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have. So let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll go straight into the next news, which is regarding the SEC. So let's see where we were at. We were at here. Burberry, good to see you. Blessings. How you doing? Salute. Mods, chats. Let's go, Burberry. Isn't that interesting? The International Monetary Fund sort of wanted them to buy Bitcoin. You could say that, but it's just. But why? Great question, Shelley. Maybe to boost confidence to the rest of the world that the country that was the first country to announce that, you know, essentially Bitcoin is a legal tender and it's a Bitcoin country. Bitcoin maxis were excited when El Salvador was the first country to announce that they're a Bitcoin country and they see Bitcoin as a legal tender. You know, Bitcoin maxis were jumping up and down and excited about that. But it turns out it was all a big fat lie. That El Salvador wasn't buying Bitcoin since the agreement. And then the second question, Orphan just asked, is probably they lied to the International Monetary Fund. You can't lie to the International Monetary Fund. They will find out. And when they do find out, it's going to be heavy penalties. So if El Salvador is lying to the International Monetary Fund, they have to show them fake records, you could even say possibly. So then El Salvador's government has to be forging documents to show to the International Monetary Fund, which opens a bigger door for a massive penalty. They owe a lot of money to the International Monetary Fund. So the International Monetary Fund could put a lot of pressure on El Salvador to pay up and pay up even more money as a heavy fine for forged documents. So the chances that that El Salvador is lying to the IMF, they got to be very stupid to lie to the IMF or even forge documents, because they know that it could be a heavy penalty of paying back all that money and something on top. So they're going to be very stupid to forge documents if they did do that. And if they didn't, they've just been lying to the whole world and lying to the Bitcoin community, boasting about their Bitcoin purchases that they never had. I bet you El Salvador got some kind of a kickback or some assistance somehow for marketing or promoting Bitcoin purchases. I agree, 100%. Because, you know, Michael Saylor or essentially all these Bitcoin companies out there are, you know, looking at Buchel's tweets of "we can never stop, nobody can stop us, we will buy Bitcoin, International Monetary Fund can't stop us." They're probably loving his tweets, but it turns out that wasn't good play. Maybe Michael Saylor had something to do with it. It was great marketing, I'll be very honest. But the International Monetary Fund agreed they could buy Bitcoin as a serious asset. They technically said they got to slow down their Bitcoin purchases and close down their Chivo wallet so that the retail section can't be involved in Bitcoin purchases. So it's more about slowing down purchases and closing the Chivo wallet. Not about buying more Bitcoin. It's more about on the size of slowing down. To me, that sounds like the International Monetary Fund is pro-Bitcoin. To me, that sounds like El Salvador's been lying. Is how I'm looking at it right now. You know, wherever the International Monetary Fund stands, pro-Bitcoin or negative Bitcoin, what I'm looking at is, has El Salvador been lying to everyone? That's what I'm looking at. Well, the Bitcoin miners not mostly positioned in China. They were. So there is good question again, D. Bitcoin miners, the majority of them, when China banned Bitcoin, moved to Texas and moved to the United States. So they're technically even Chinese companies that are doing Bitcoin mining in the US. But there is few Bitcoin miners left in China in small amounts, even though it's not allowed, but it is allowed in certain provinces of China to mine Bitcoin still. So there are Bitcoin miners still inside of China that are in different provinces that they can essentially, Bitcoin mine. But the majority of the bigger manufacturing is all left to the United States. The International Monetary Fund is a mafia. I agree. I agree 100%. I agree with you. The International Monetary, in my opinion, the International Monetary Fund is just a big bully that goes around and bullies other nations. I agree with you. Now, moving off that to the SEC. The SEC chairman outlines new approach to cryptocurrency regulations, a significant shift from previous enforcement tactics. Atkins' strategy is expected to bolster market clarity and attract institutional investments. So now that essentially the regulations have essentially been successfully passed, and Trump needs to just sign them one by one, he's already signed the Genius Act, the SEC is getting ready for the next step. The SEC Chairman Paul Atkins' announcement aligns with a structured regulatory shift, aiming for essentially more clearer cryptocurrency guidelines. He emphasizes on promoting tokenization alongside safeguarding essentially fraud prevention. Paul Atkins essentially remarked clearer rules of the road are necessary for investor protection against essentially fraud, which supports the shift from the HOC enforcement to structured rulemaking. Now, this pivot contrasts with previous policies, leaning towards proactive rule creation under his leadership. With stablecoins essentially failing within banking regulators' remits, a notable change could reshape financial oversight and structures, as detailed in the SEC press release on key essentially regulatory updates. The SEC's focus narrows to securities laws, reinforcing essentially internal coordination through his crypto task force. Now, its regulatory essentially precision is anticipated to positively influence market stability and growth trajectories. Reacting to Atkins' approach, early market sentiments appears optimistic, and comments from developers and industry leaders are often welcome to clarify essentially regulatory landscapes, or essentially as articulated in recent essentially speeches. These regulations are anticipated to foster trust and engagement among institutional investors and essentially financial participants. Atkins' discussions, tokenizations, and a roundtable highlighting the importance of regulatory clarity. Interesting enough, as the banks are now talking about tokenization is where they're headed, because the banks realize that they're going to be losing in the stablecoin battle. The banks announced, essentially JP Morgan announced they're going to go towards tokenization because they're going to lose the stablecoin battle. Interesting enough, the SEC also comes out today and says they're going to move towards tokenization also. This could result in enhanced DeFi protocol engagements and blossom institutional trust in new digital security frameworks, particularly nurturing market growth and technological adoption also. Now, it's just, everything seems like it's so coincidental or just coordinated as hell. Honestly. Moving off the SEC's very alignment with essentially JP Morgan's announcement of going towards tokenized deposits, and SEC now talking about we're going to go towards tokenization also, to Charles Schwab's. So some of you might have heard this news, some of you might not have heard this news, but here it is. Charles Schwab's is set to begin spot Bitcoin and Ethereum trading, starting off with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Charles Schwab's, the US brokerage firm with $10.7 trillion under management, is set to roll essentially out spot Bitcoin and Ethereum trading. According to the company's CEO, Rick, both BTC and Ethereum will become meaningful long-term growth drivers for the company. He also he revealed that Schwab's plans to start a spot crypto trading last November and retreated his plans to the firm spring 2025. Business update. At the time, he said that the deployments would depend on better regulatory environments in the US. Our expectation is that with the essentially changing regulatory environments, we are hopeful and likely essentially to be able to launch direct spot crypto, and our goal is to do that in the next 12 months. And we're on the essentially great path to be able to do that, he said. In addition to trading services, he revealed that Schwab's plans to launch a stablecoin. He said the firm is exploring multiple pathways to deliver essentially this stablecoin. This suggests an openness to the partnership, in-house developments, or even leveraging existing blockchain infrastructure. Stablecoins are likely to play a role in transacting on blockchains, and that's something we do want to be able to offer. He said we will have essentially a stablecoin at some point. They also said the statement comes after the Genius Act, essentially, which has passed and been signed into. Charles Schwab's interest in crypto trading comes as spot crypto volumes fell by 22% in the second quarter of 2025, and crypto spot trading volumes on major centralized exchanges fell by $5.3 trillion in quarter 4 to 2024 to $4.6 trillion in quarter 1 2025, and then essentially onwards on climbing. Now, meanwhile, Ether spot Ethereum ETFs saw their most significant daily net inflows on Wednesday, totaling $726.74 million. The inflows were essentially led by $499 million into essentially BlackRock's also fund. Following the news today, Charles Schwab will join the London-based international banking group Standard Chartered, which ironically is Ripple's partner, which launched a US dollar paired Bitcoin and Ethereum spot trading service for institutional clients this week, including corporates and investors and asset managers. Charles Schwab has also essentially revealed today that it benefited from a surge in trading activity around President Trump's tariffs. The brokerage essentially profits rose 60% in the quarter compared to a year ago. Also, the late quarter market bounce not only increased the amount of money that brokerages manage, but also allowed companies like Schwab's essentially to charge higher fees. Schwab's posted adjusted earnings essentially per their share of $1.14, while total client assets climbed 14% to $10.76 trillion. So Charles Schwab is about to be launching crypto services as well. It's just another sign, another beacon to the whole world that more major institutional players are about to be entering the crypto space. Now, moving off Charles Schwab's to MasterCard. MasterCard, just like essentially JP Morgan, is in the same boat, because they don't know how they're supposed to take their next steps. Banks right now, after this law has passed inside the United States regarding the Genius Act, they don't know how to respond. Some banks just don't know what to do. They don't know what their next steps are going to be. And in JP Morgan's case, they said we're going towards tokenization because they knew that people are going to essentially take fiat and turn to stablecoins now. So global payment giant MasterCard, for example, signed in a statement on its official blog that stablecoins, which stand out among cryptocurrencies, have now reached a turning point and are creating a significant impact in the real world. The company noted that stablecoins offer low-cost and fast solutions, especially in cross-border transactions, highlighted the future potentials of these digital assets. The statement noted that the Genius Act passed by U.S. Congress provides the long-awaited legal framework for digital assets and instills confidence in the sector. This step, along with the European Union's essentially MiCA regulations, contributes to a global regulatory momentum. Financial centers such as Hong Kong, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates are also taking a similar approach by introducing a secure and transparent regulation for stablecoins. MasterCard stated that these developments lay the foundation for a more harmonious and reliable environment in the industry, saying that we support clear and strong regulations that foster innovation while enhancing trust. MasterCard stated that stablecoins are already offering tangible benefits in the business world. The blog post noted that stablecoins accelerate cross-border business-to-business essentially payments, simplifying peer-to-peer essentially money transfers, and provide a much more flexible option for content creators essentially and employees. However, the company stated that the technological advancements alone are not enough for these digital assets to enter the mainstream. You know what MasterCard means by that one simple paragraph? So just to repeat the paragraph again, I'll tell you what it means in simple words. So MasterCard, after essentially saying, stablecoins, so JP Morgan obviously took a very different approach. JP Morgan today took a very different approach by saying, they're moving away technically from essentially stablecoins to tokenization because it's a losing battle for JP Morgan to be inside the stablecoin space. So they're going towards tokenization. MasterCard took a different approach regarding the Genius Act that was passed today. MasterCard said stablecoins are amazing, they're fast, they're cheap, they're reliable, they're secure, they're transparent. And then they ended it with, essentially, just to repeat it again, they said, however, the company, essentially MasterCard, stated that technological advancements alone are not enough for these digital assets to enter the mainstream. So MasterCard said, yes, stablecoins are all these brilliant things, but you still need MasterCard to be able to enter the real world. No, you don't. You really don't. Because again, I could just do an XRP wallet transfer. I don't need MasterCard, and I don't need Visa either. And some of you might say, well, how are you going to spend your crypto? There are certain ways of, like Binance Pay, for example, or Coinbase Pay, or essentially there are certain ways that are being, methods that are being used in different countries right now, where essentially you scan a barcode for a crypto transfer, and there's no MasterCard and there's no Visa involved. So MasterCard took an interest approach. They're trying to say to the world, yes, crypto and stable coins are fast, reliable, cheap, secure, transparent. But however, you still need MasterCard to make that happen. No, you don't. You really don't need MasterCard to make that happen whatsoever. So the approaches are quite funny. You know, JP Morgan just saying, okay, we've lost the stablecoin battle. MasterCard saying, you need us for stablecoins. We don't need any of them. None of them. It emphasized that they must be integrated within systems that are reliable, user-friendly, and ensure global compliance. Well, an XRP wallet isn't reliable? An XLM wallet isn't reliable? In a blog post, MasterCard stated that it has been preparing for years to make stablecoins secure and scalable. I'm sorry, what? MasterCard came out and said that they've been doing it, that essentially MasterCard came out and said, they stated that it has been preparing for years to make stablecoins secure and scalable. No, you haven't. MasterCard did a blockchain program for startup companies and said, whoever is inside a digital space that's in the stablecoin sector and so on, come to us and we'll work together. But what about companies like Ripple, who've been securing themselves? What about XLM Foundation? What about Cardano Foundation? What about Solana's Foundation? What about AVAX? Have you been securing them also? So it's just a very different approach that they're taking right now. But this is what I mean by banks are stuck right now. Banks are very, very stuck right now. They don't know what their next step is going to be. Some banks, like JP Morgan, will go into tokenization and become some sort of fintech companies later on, because that's the only way JP Morgan is going to survive later on, not overnight. JP Morgan is not going to collapse overnight. But as time goes by, their customer base are going to start going towards stable coins. As essentially was stated, $6.6 trillion is about to be exiting. So some banks like JP Morgan are going to be going towards, becoming tokenization firms and fintech firms. That's the only way they're going to survive. And on the other hand, companies like MasterCard and Visa are trying to give off the image by marketing themselves as, we should be the middleman to your payments. But we don't need them. We really don't need them. So different approaches. Some banks have given up and they're just going to, join the wave, and some are going to market themselves as, you still need us, but we don't. We really don't. Honestly, the floodgates that's been opened by this Genius Act is absolutely hilarious regarding what's happening around the world. Two banks, well, especially inside the United States, because other banks that don't have these regulations yet inside of their nations, for example, in the UK, we don't have the Genius Act, for example, in the UK. And there's a lot of essential other jurisdictions around the world that don't have the Genius Act or something similar to it. But even those banks are looking at the US now going, oh crap. Because if the US passed the Genius Act, they know for a fact that their own countries are about to pass something similar to a Genius Act, which makes those banks and those countries also go, oh crap. Because they don't know what to do either. It's either they go fintech or go bust. Now, before we go through the next news, let's go inside the comment section first, and then we'll go straight into the next news. Let's see where we were at inside the comment section. We were at here. As I said previously, also, this is live, which means if you do have any questions or statements to make, put it down to the comment section. More than happy to answer the questions you may have. So let's see where we were at. We were at here. Two brothers rule El Salvador, so they do what they like. They brought probably on the brother account. Maybe we'll XRP. We never know. El Salvador, if it did buy, most likely probably using a different bank. Good evening, future utility legends. Let's go, Davey. How you doing? Evening. Shelley says Tangent is creating a card as well. That's correct. That is very correct. Yes. I'm totally new here in crypto, but I can switch on my Revolut. More expensive. Okay, but still, banks are like Nokia back in the day. Listening to this, facts. So Miles, does that mean that cable is crashing with every new bill passed? Touche. Pretty much, yes. With every new bill, perfectly put, Freedom Forever, with every new bill that's being passed, the traditional world is collapsing like a domino effect. With the Genius Act that's being passed, banks are shaking right now because they don't know how they're going to survive starting tomorrow, for example. Again, banks are not going to collapse overnight in any sort of a way, but over time, the retail section especially will be taking out their money out of traditional banks, because let's say somebody has $20,000 in savings, for example. Let's say somebody has $10,000 in savings. They can take their $10,000 from their Chase bank account and, for example, put it into USDC with Coinbase and earn essentially a 4% yield on it. But they can't do that through Chase Bank with their $10,000 or $5,000. But they can do that through Coinbase, for example. So with every bill that's being passed, it's one step closer to a digital world, one step closer to utility for the blockchain world, and one step closer essentially to a domino effect happening. So yeah, honestly, is the mic okay? I think so. Hair crackles with mic a little bit, maybe. I'm not sure. I think it's the platform that I'm using. That's why. Thoughts on DG token? C3, if it's named DG token, then it's not going to be a good project. Just by not looking at it, I can tell you that. Neuro Labs, thoughts, bro. C3, put a comment outside the live on YouTube, because you're watching from YouTube as well. So just put a comment outside of this live on YouTube, and I'll just put a response to your comment. I'll just reply to your comments. No problem. I'll just look into it, see what's going on that project. Banks will survive by putting the blockchain on Wall Street. Banks don't need to put blockchain on Wall Street, because Wall Street will also see that there's no need for banks to be in play. So the only thing that banks have is a client base. Let me just put it out there. The only thing that banks have is the reputation of safeguarding your money and a client list. Those are the two things a bank really has, except your money, obviously. But the two things a bank really has is essentially the reputation of safeguarding your money and also a client list. Now, with a Genius Act passing, the client base will just slowly go into blockchain, stablecoins, for example. And all that's left is the reputation of the bank. But then you can also argue that companies like Ripple are, essentially very responsible, very safeguarding, even though they're not safeguarding your money, but essentially it's the platform they've created. So banks only have two things: a client list and reputation of safeguarding your money. And that client list is about to exit slowly. All that's left is their reputation, which they can hang it on the wall. Now, XRP is what we're going to talk about next. And as I said, the only banks that are going to exist are central banks. Central banks will exist because they're the ones that are coming with this wholesale CBDC and retail CBDCs with the private entities behind them. But other banks, it's either fintech or close up shop. Now, XRP is what we're going to talk about next. They need to start staking crypto. I agree regarding banks, they need to start staking crypto, but banks are going against Coinbase right now, saying, why is Coinbase giving yield on stablecoins? Banks right now are angry at essentially Coinbase offering yields on stablecoins. And they're saying that Coinbase should not be allowed to give out yields on stablecoins because the banks don't want the client base leaving for yields on stablecoins. All the bank cares about is their own pockets. They couldn't care at all about the retail section, that they could maybe earn a little bit of an extra few bucks if they move to stablecoins. But no, the bank wants to take away your extra few bucks and keep you in the bank. Honestly, it's just ridiculous. The banks have had too much power for too long, and it's great to see companies like Ripple coming in and tearing them apart, honestly. Now, XRP. XRP surges to, on the topic of Ripple, XRP surges to record highs aimed market activity. XRP surge to an all-time new high reflects growing investor essentially confidence and favorable regulatory actions impacting market dynamics. XRP recently reached a new price milestone, climbing to $3.66. The spike aligns with increased whale activity, where wallet addresses holding over 1 million XRP hit record highs, suggesting significant investor interest. Ripple Labs, led by CEO Brad Garlinghouse, oversees essentially that XRP's progress, as noted by Cointelegraph. Big investors are getting involved with XRP right now. With whale activity at an all-time high, the lack of direct official commentary on this recent rise keeps the market in a speculation-driven space. Whale movements and derivatives volumes point to bullish sentiments for XRP. The market witnessed a landmark XRP rally, impacting market cap and trading volume. XRP's market cap soared to $216 billion, while trading volume for spot and derivatives saw noteworthy essentially increases, reflecting substantial financial impact. Such shifts underscores essentially implications for leveraged traders. A notable $73.17 million in short positions were liquidated. Who the hell was shorting XRP when it was climbing? Honestly, only a moron would short XRP when it was climbing. The regulatory environment, including recent US legislations, contributes positively to institutional involvements. Observed price movements in Bitcoin and Ethereum add to the overall market optimism. XRP's surge essentially parallels uptrends in essentially these major cryptocurrencies, indicating a robust investment climate impacting larger crypto markets. Potentially significant outcomes include further investor accumulation and positive regulatory developments for XRP and related projects. Historical data suggests that these conditions often precede broader adoption and continued price strength across the asset class. RLUSD's recognition indicates its potential to redefine stablecoin adoption as it aligns with regulatory and market expectations. Ripple's RLUSD, led by Brad Garlinghouse, has been approved, as we also spoke about it as well, Dubai's Financial Service Authority, which is adding still more, that momentum. RLUSD is gaining momentum due to its robust regulatory compliance and utility, positioning it ahead of many competitors right now. RLUSD is rocketing right now also. This approach knows their market cap. This approach has led to rapid growth across markets for XRP and RLUSD. As the US moves towards a clearer regulation path, we expect to see greater adoption of stablecoins like RLUSD, which offer real utility and are backed by years of trust and expertise in the industry. Again, going back to what banks have, banks only have client base and essentially that reliability of trust, which Ripple has both now. Well, they're about to get the bank's client base also. Ripple's leadership team includes Jack McDonald, has essentially strictly positioned RLUSD with widespread use as collateral in diverse markets. Regulatory clarity underpins RLUSD's success, enabling new listings on major exchanges and ongoing partnerships with NGOs for streamlined financial activities. The launch of RLUSD in Dubai marks, for example, a significant advancement for Ripple as it builds a foothold in the regulated markets. This fosters essentially an industry trust and enhances stablecoin utilization as more exchanges list RLUSD. And also, let's not forget the perfect timing of BNY Mellon's involvement in essentially crucial for maintaining auditable reserves, bolstering more confidence for Ripple going into the Genius Act passing through and signed through. Ripple has just added more credibility to the table with that BNY Mellon that they essentially signed as well right before the crypto week. Ripple's approach may impact traditional finance and crypto sectors due to RLUSD's extensive use in trading and payments. This move aligns with evolving regulatory landscapes, possibly influencing future legislative developments concerning stablecoin issuance and oversight. RLUSD's integration to platforms like Transact illustrates broader acceptance with potential implications for new technological innovations and user-base expansions. Ripple's regulatory essentially strategy serves as a model for stability and growth in the dynamic cryptocurrency sector. Ripple is going to do, to add more on top of that, XRP shows no signs of a price bubble also, as Ripple's essentially tech beats Bitcoin and Ethereum. An academic source highlighting a notable distinction between XRP and other leading cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. According to essentially the content, a study conducted by Frey 2018 applied a rational bubble model to various cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin and Ethereum. The model revealed that both Bitcoin and Ethereum exhibited signs of bubble behavior during observed periods, while XRP did not show any characteristics typically associated with the value of a bubble. Anybody remember the dot-com boom? Well, they're saying essentially Bitcoin and Ethereum can burst at any point, whereas XRP is safe, sound, and secure. This observation is grounded in empirical economic analysis. The exhaustive references essentially from the 2018 report, who essentially measured changes in values across Bitcoin and 16 subcoins during 2013-2016, using essentially the distributed lag, the ARDL model. Their findings concluded that macroeconomics and essentially financial developments did not significantly impact XRP's valuation in the same way they influenced Bitcoin. This is why I said for the longest time that I cannot wait until we get regulations to move away from Bitcoin's treacherous footsteps inside the crypto space. That regulations means decoupling, and decoupling means utility. And when we get utility essentially for projects like XRP, when they're being used as a payment essentially tool around the whole world, in terms of a gas token, you can say, or whatever, essentially, RLUSD being used, or the XRP ledger in general being used, if we have macroeconomic factors happening around the world, if we have geopolitical tensions, tariff news happening, we wouldn't see drastic price drops essentially in XRP because it's being used 24/7 then, and it's decoupled from the treacherous footsteps of Bitcoin. This implied that speculative pressure had minimal effect on XRP, representing a more stable valuation and structure. The rational bubble model applied by Frey suggested the presence of speculative excess in Bitcoin and Ethereum markets. These cryptocurrencies demonstrated price patterns that aligned with theoretical expectations for asset bubbles. In contrast, XRP remained outside these dynamics. The study explicitly noted that the detection of a bubble in Bitcoin and Ethereum, while none was spotted in XRP. There's no bubble that's going to burst in XRP because it's sound, secure, and safe. The essentially underscores the technical and structural reasons for this difference. It states that the absence of a bubble-like characteristics in XRP may be due to the superior technological essentially infrastructure underlying Ripple's system. We know for a fact that Ripple is 10 times, the XRP ledger or Ripple or XRP as a token is 10 times better than Bitcoin. It's 10 times better than Ethereum. They're both slow and congested. Ethereum never made any sort of sense as a payment tool. It just never made sense. If I want to send my friend $20 on a congested network like Ethereum, sometimes I might be paying $10 or $20 in fees. So I'll pay $20 to my friend and pay $20 in fees. If I use my own bank account right now, for example, like Lloyd's Bank or HSBC Bank, I can make a $20 donation to I can make a $20 transfer to my friend and pay zero fees. So what the hell is the point of Ethereum? So honestly, this includes Ripple's use of a unique node for consensus and transactions and validations, which allows for higher consistency, trust, and network efficiency. And now that we have regulations, the real game begins. And the SEC is going to drop that case because they have nothing to hold on to, and the rules and regulations are about to kick in, and we're going to see the real game happening. No more essentially being held back by the SEC when the case has to be dropped. No more held by the SEC, no more held back behind essentially regulations not happening. Now that we have regulations, cases about to get dropped, ETFs are about to be passed, and let's see who the real winner is. Now that nobody's holding back essentially XRP. XRP felt like it was in a race where two people were just holding XRP back so that Bitcoin and Ethereum can run. That's how it seemed like for the longest time, that XRP, Bitcoin, and Ethereum were in a race. But there was two people holding back essentially XRP, while Bitcoin and Ethereum can run to the finishing line. But unfortunately, now that we have regulations and the case is about to get dropped and we're about to have ETFs, let's see who makes it to the finishing line. The cited academic essential analysis concludes that the reason no bubble has been detected in XRP because it may be directly tied to Ripple's technological superiority over Bitcoin. This includes Ripple's consensus mechanism, speed, and governance structure, which contrasts sharply with Bitcoin's energy-intensive proof-of-work model. The exhort attributions Ripple's advantages to its resolution of the general problems through the UNL system, which enhances transaction integrity and ensures broader consensus without needing mining. This system also maintains transparency and autonomy in transaction records, similar to Bitcoin, but achieves efficiency essentially through a different operational logic. These aspects of Ripple's infrastructures likely contribute to XRP's resilience against speculative volatility, and is essentially more characteristics of Bitcoin and Ethereum. What again they're probably referring to, you can even say they're referring to now, is that XRP being essentially sued by the SEC, missed bull runs, went through tariffs, went through wars, and still remained in the top 10. You can't name one cryptocurrency that would have been sued by the SEC into the ground the way XRP was, that went through wars, that went through tariffs, that went through everything, and still remained in the top 10. There's not a single cryptocurrency that will survive what XRP went through. So you could say, essentially, what they're referring to back then even applies to what happened essentially with XRP, where it went through hell and it still stood its ground in the top 10. This evidence suggests that XRP's values and dynamics are less influenced by speculative behavior and are more closely tied to the robust functionalities of underlying technology. This distinction essentially continues to serve as a key and essentially differentiator between XRP and other major cryptocurrencies out there. This is why I say XRP is just on its own, it is complete on its own league by miles far. ProShares also, Ultra XRP ETF, went live today. In a pivotal move for digital asset adoptions, the ProShares Ultra XRP ETF, ticker UXRP, is now officially live. This development, confirmed by essentially the report that essentially came out, signals a major advancement in bringing XRP to traditional financial markets through regulated investment products. The ETF was also made effective following the filings of the amendment of number 377 under essentially the Investment Company Act of 1940 by ProShares Trust. ProShares, renowned essentially for its lineup of leverage and inverse ETFs, has expanded its offerings with the launch of an UXRP, an exchange-traded fund designed to deliver 2x daily exposures to the performance of XRP. This allows investors to gain amplified access to XRP's price movements without technical complexities of owning the asset directly through derivatives and futures contracts. The fund aims to mirror XRP's daily returns, appealing essentially to both institutional players and high-risk tolerant retail investors as well. And the SEC filing specified that the proposed effective date for UXRP was July 18, 2025, under paragraph B of the application essential rules. With the ETF now live, ProShares has officially ushered XRP into the growing family of crypto-linked ETFs traded on the US market space. The debut of UXRP follows a wave of crypto ETFs approvals inside the United States, including the spot Bitcoin ETFs approved in early 2024 and the Ethereum ETFs greenlit. While UXRP is not technically a spot ETF, it's a leverage structure reflects growing regulatory openness towards offering advanced XRP-related financial products to the public. This shift in regulatory tone has made possible in the part of by legal clarity achieved in Ripple Labs' multi-year essentially battle with the SEC. And the official SEC registration list for ProShares Trust, as essentially the headquartered at the 727 Wisconsin Avenue, Maryland, Richard Morris of ProShares Advisors LLC is named as the agent for the service. Legal supporters for the filing was provided by attorneys Allison M. and essentially Mark D. and other members from the LLP, and these details reflect the formal structure behind UXRP's approval and underscores the seriousness essentially with which traditional finance is now approaching XRP integration. The ETF comes at a time of renowned investor interest in XRP, which recently broke its all-time high of $3.40 and surged to $3.60, hitting essentially the 1.618 essentially Fibonacci extension, a key level often targeted in major market rallies. With XRP now entering price discovery territory, a leverage essentially ETF like UXRP arrives at a significant moment for investors essentially looking to maximize exposure to future gains. And Ripple's essentially announcements on X was met with widespread excitement across the XRP community, with many seeing this as a major step forward in mainstreaming XRP as a legitimate investment vehicle. Similarly, the launch of a Pro XRP, essentially shares Ultra XRP ETF, represents more than just another financial product. It's a signal, a new level of institutional acceptance for XRP. By offering leverage exposure and a regulated structure, UXRP opens the door for broader participation in the XRP market and elevates the asset's standing among top-tier cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. As investors' appetite for crypto exposures continues to grow, UXRP provides a timely and powerful tool for those seeking to capture XRP upside within a traditional financial framework. Honestly, now that we have rules and regulations, next is SEC dropping the case. Next is XRP ETFs. Nothing is going to hold XRP back then. Honestly, it went through hell and still stood its ground. There's not a single crypto project out of the 24, 30, or 50,000 crypto projects we have now. There's not a single crypto project that would have survived what XRP went through, which shows that XRP isn't as volatile as people may think it is. It went through getting sued by the SEC pretty much into the ground and still remained in the top 10. It went through wars, still remained top 10 while still being sued by the SEC. It went through macroeconomic factors while still being sued by the SEC and still remained top 10. It went through tariffs. I mean, it went through everything still while being sued by the SEC, and it survived. There's not a single crypto project that would have survived what XRP went through, which shows the token like XRP, a crypto like XRP, is not as volatile as people may think it is. And it does hold its ground down because it's still remaining top 10. There are crypto projects that are not in the top 10. I'm not going to throw shade on crypto projects out there, for example. And thank you, Funky Brother. XRP has went through bear markets while being sued by the SEC and still remain top 10. It's went through everything and it's still remaining top 10. Everything negative you could pretty much think of, a crypto project or a company that could possibly go through, and it still held its ground. And there are crypto projects that haven't been sued by the SEC, who made multiple partnerships, got multiple contracts, got multiple licensing, and they still couldn't make it in the top 10. And XRP was in the top 10 in bear markets, being sued by the SEC, went through wars, went through tariffs, went through geopolitical tensions, went through microeconomic factors, and still remained top 10, while still being sued by the SEC. So that should speak volumes of what it's capable of doing, even when it's standing still. But now it's no longer standing still. Now we're at the stage of regulations. Now we're at the stage of regulations being passed and being signed. The real game is going to begin very soon, especially when that case gets dropped by the SEC. Then there's nothing stopping it. It's like the cartoon that everybody saw as a child, the hare and the turtle. Who won at the end? The turtle. Now, we have also reached the endings of tonight's live. If you're watching this for the first time ever, this was called the CMF Live. It stands for Crypto Mouse Family. My name is Miles. You can tune into this live Monday to Friday, 10 p.m. London time onwards. And this was episode 337 of the CMF Live. We're on episode 337. Episode 338 will be on Monday. And yeah, XRP has been signed up by most contracts whilst being sued. Absolute facts. If you enjoyed this live show, drop a like, drop a comment, drop a retweet. If you're watching this on X right now, CMF members, like, comment, and retweet, because there's so many things that I want to do, but I want to grow this family. So drop a like, drop a comment, drop a retweet. If you watch us on X, CMF members, I really do appreciate what everyone likes and retweets and put a comment outside the live. If you watch us on YouTube, CMF members, just like and put a comment outside the live as well. If you followed me and subscribed to me during this live show as well, welcome to the CMF family. And you can tune to this live show Monday to Friday, 10 p.m. London time onwards. And this was episode 337. Episode 338 will be on Monday. So let's go to the conversation first. Obviously, before we do leave and call it a night, let's see where we're at. We were at here, They need to start staking crypto. Yeah, they're just annoyed Coinbase were onto it first. Pretty much. Facts, honestly, Shelly. Miles, you have been saying for years that by 2027, there won't be any high street branches. It's all coming true. Facts. I did say that. I said 2027, there's going to be no more banks on the high streets. Once again, you're right. You know, as I've always said, I always have the last laugh. I always have the last laugh. And I'm not being cocky in any sort of a way. It's just because I base my answers on what I read in terms of documents. And what the documents tell me is I'm going to have the last laugh. And obviously the mindset that I have as well, which is not a mindset that most people have. Again, I'm not being cocky in any sort of way. It's just of, you know, the finance work I was in. What do you think the future will be for Tether? Did they really pump Bitcoin? Yes, Tether 100% pumped Bitcoin. 100% Tether pumped Bitcoin. And once we find out that it's just oxygen backing the majority of USDT, that's going to be interesting as well, because now that we have rules and regulations and we're about to go into decoupling, and whatever happens to Bitcoin happens to Bitcoin. I'll be honest, because the moment we decouple, it doesn't matter anymore what happens to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of the biggest scams in the world, digital history. Yeah. Free game brought to you by Crypto Miles Crystal Ball, always on point. Seriously, why is ETH even in the party? At the party, facts. XRP has gone through bear markets. XRP has signaled signed the most contracts while being sued. Good night, Miles, and all the CMF. Thank you for a great live and for all the news. XRP 2 Miles, lol, let's go. Night, Miles, the CMF. Pablo, see you on Monday, same time as usual. JPC on Monday, same time as usual. Thanks and God bless. Let's go. DC on Monday, same time as usual. 10 p.m. London time. Good night, Miles, the CMF. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday. See you on Monday, Mike. Same time as usual. Great show as always. Let's go, Gino. See you on Monday. Same time as usual. Thanks, brother, for an amazing live show. Let's go. Come on. Let's go. See you tomorrow. See you on Monday. Same time as usual. Come on. Take care, Miles and CMF. See you on next episode. Definitely like, share, and comment for support. Let's go, Ray. Absolutely facts. And I love the little turtle emoji, rabbit emoji in your comment section. Good night, Miles, and God willing, we will catch up on Monday. Look after yourself, brother. Let's go, funky brother. See you on Monday, same time as usual. Good night, Miles and CMF. See you tomorrow. Let's go. Orphans, see you on Monday, same time as usual. Facts. Let's go, Gino. See you on Monday, same time as usual. Good night, Miles. See you on Monday, same time as usual. Callie, could you give me a quick call, please? Come on. Yes, no problem. I'll give you a quick call after live. Good night, Miles and CMF. Excellent news. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday. Let's go, brother. See you on Monday, same time as usual. Thank you, Miles, for another great live. Let's go, funky brother. See you on Monday, same time as usual. Many thanks, Miles. Have a wonderful weekend. Let's go, CMF. Let's go, Shelley. See you on Monday, same time as usual. Night, Miles, all of you, and CMF, future millionaires. Brilliant live, as always. Let's go, Joe. See you on Monday, same time as usual. Shelley, see you on Monday, same time as usual as well. Thank you so much. Great job, Miles. My mentor, holding it down. Scott, see you on Monday, same time as usual as well. When do you think BTC will fall? Time will tell, but we're not that far off. I appreciate you, Miles. I'm going to send you a message, Miles. Let's go, Scott. Good night, Miles. Let's go. I'll see everybody on Monday, same timing as usual, 10 p.m. London time onwards. Nice live, Miles. Keep up the good work. Let's go, Michael. See everybody on Monday, same timing as usual, 10 p.m. London time, Monday to Friday. You can tune into this live show. This was episode 337 of the CMF live show. And the disclaimer of this live, as always, is not financial advice, not political advice, and whatever I say is only for entertainment purposes. That's what I thought, Joe. Beam and Hot, both good. And they're in sectors, they're both good. See you every Monday, same time as usual. Everybody have a great day or a good night, depending on where you're around the world. Everybody have a great weekend, depending on where you are around the world. This was episode 337. See everybody on Monday for episode 338. Follow, subscribe, comment, like, share, retweet if you already haven't. See everybody on Monday, same time as usual, for episode 338 of the CMF Live. See you on Monday.